So apparently, all right. Yeah, we're all coming back now. Folks, we will wait patiently for just a little bit. I think the rest of yeah, there we go. We're starting to populate back in now.
Robert, I had a group of overachievers, so sorry we're late coming back.
Well, I did as well. I had a lot of stars. The one person who was not an overachiever is currently speaking, and what they did wrong was, despite your efforts of creating those Google slides, I accidentally closed that and then couldn't find it again. So I hand wrote what we talked about.
Hey, that works.
We'll come back and we'll make record of it.
Okay, I'll tell you what, as you all talk through it, I've got it open. I can capture your notes on the slide too, just so we have it for our own records. We'll make sure we get that.
And actually what I could do is, just for because we do have plenty of time, if we wanted to start sharing the feedback from your group's discussion, I can actually type up this and send it over to you that way too.
Okay.
So
let me, Robert, I'll just send you the link again, and you can drop those notes in there. And Sandra is going to start us out with the conversation, and then anybody else from our group is more than welcome to join in if we need additional comments. So Robert, are you ready for us to start the kind of the debrief?
Absolutely. I am looking forward to it.
All right, here we go.
Oh, wow. Those are a lot of words.
You don't have to say all of them, Sandra.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that. So in our group, we only had 2 institutions represented specifically. Of course, I'm representing KCTCS as a whole, but there are 16 unique individual colleges within KCTCS, and I know that they all have their own very specific programs. So I'm really only able to talk a lot about what ECTC has for this particular piece. WKU has summer scholars and living learning communities. Their retention on the living learning communities was 80 to 100%. They're still working on success in classes, but the retention piece has definitely proved an immediate impact. They're also doing a How to College, thinking of summer camp for local high schools. I mentioned how KCTCS are unique and different. We do have a Smarter Summer program here at ECTC. It's really small because there is a scholarship that goes along with it for students try to get out of some developmental classes. We have lots of programs once they get here, like every other KCTCS college, and every probably 4, well, I know the 4 years have even more than we have, to help students once they're here. We do also have KCTCS as a whole has a partnership with adult education throughout the state. So students that need even more help than we can provide them for developmental courses typically are referred to adult education. Here at E-Town, ours is specifically located on our campus. It's not that way for all 16 colleges, but we do work closely with that partner in the state. The EOC grant is more of an advising component, but they go out to schools and help get students registered and that sort of thing if they're planning on attending the local community and technical college. We talked about the K-12 systems that might be able to help just briefly. So that's still a question we have. Let's see. We were talking about how do we get students connected and comfortable to access the support and communication, word of mouth is a big one. First Generation, there's a gateway initiative where faculty at WKU are revising their entry-level courses to reduce those DFW rates. We have here at ECTC an online and in-person orientation. I think almost every KCTCS college has some combination of orientations, just like everybody else. We don't have any sort of residents is specifically living on campus, so that makes communication even a little bit more difficult for KCTCS, but we use all the traditional methods just like WKU and everybody else: text, email, when we're allowed to, flyers, all those things. We do have KCTCS wide an FYE 105 introductory course for specifically associate in arts and associate in science students that are transferring, which is achieving academic success. It's basically how to college. Did I get everything, team? Feel free to jump in if I missed something.
It was fabulous.
Okay. So I did not make it all the way to getting all the bullets in there, but we will talk through some of this, and I will actually encourage some of those folks who spoke to a few of these things, please chime in because we have some time, and I will also just keep adding to some of these notes here as we go. So part of our discussion, we immediately jumped into one of the key stakeholders that tends to be one of those folks that help to assist with the conveyance of social capital, at least as it relates to students in high school transitioning over to post-secondary pursuits, and that being the guidance counselor. And one of the initial questions that we talked about in our group is how do we explore these connections and maybe strengthen those in such a way so that we're capitalizing on that partnership so that students are getting better equipped for their post-secondary transition. And we absolutely can talk through that in just a moment. Another fundamental question I think that was brought up that we want to just be mindful of is what type of school is a student going to? What was the culture? And I certainly minimize that because I was finding myself trying to rush and time. But basically, what is the post-secondary aspirational culture of your school? Are students expected to then transition on to a certain type of post-secondary pursuit? Like what's the culture that influences what students are perceiving as their options for post-secondary pursuits? We highlighted actually a couple exemplars. I didn't really, as you can see, I didn't make it all the way down, and I will need someone to explain further. The Jefferson County Public Schools has a program possibly that we need to look into as one that is a good example of some programs that we want to be mindful of. Morehead State has an example of a program that we might want to look at. And Dan, don't let me, I think Eagle Outreach is what is the name of the program we're looking at there. But we do have a few, we have some things that we can look at. But the guidance counselor is just seen as one of the key stakeholders that we might want to hone in on. Tony has some really good examples, and actually OJ and Tony, you two, please feel free the minute that I stop talking here, has some good examples about some of the initiatives of Gear Up and how this is a very intentional effort to try to bolster some of the social capital of our students coming in, ranging from FAFSA workshops to college applications workshops. But even, and Tony, I think you spoke about a more nuanced approach of of how guidance counselors' roles might be limited or might be different based on the school they're in, just based on all the other competing priorities that they have in their workday. So that's something certainly that I think we want to be mindful of. And we also talked through a bit about how it might be helpful for us to look at some more data, which is going to be convenient because that's something that we're absolutely going to do. NESE data might give us some insights into the belonging piece to give us some senses of like where those pain points, like where those places where students are, they're telling us that they didn't feel they belonged in a certain circumstance or in a certain situation. What's the data telling us? And then once we examine that, it can help inform some of our thoughts and ideas. OJ and Tony, I absolutely did not articulate your thoughts in the way that you did and as thorough as you did. So I offer you the chance to step in and correct the record for whatever it is that I just said.
Well, I will go. I think OJ had a phone call. I think you summed it up pretty good. I think when it comes to some of our students in the schools that we serve, like you said, though the counselors are spread too thin. So I think there's already been this idea that we want to increase the college going culture or create a college going culture by spreading that out through to Gear Up staff, as well as even certain teachers. Like, Bourbon County has a really strong English department who focuses on all the transition activities and things that their students need to do. So it might not just all of Gear Up, of course, but also figuring out how to strengthen the pipeline from those people to the first year to, okay, here's through to enrollment. Now what do I do? Which is the post-secondary transition role that I'm in with Gear Up. We are there to help connect them to support services. Sometimes that is so difficult for whatever reason. Like I can reach out to support services sometimes and not hear nothing back, and call and email. And so how do we create a situation to where I can do that and with confidence, or build confidence in that student to do it themselves? Yeah, I think that was about it. I think you summed it up pretty good. Just figuring out a more intentional space for each of the partners who are working in that pipeline to know what we have to do, when we should do it, and how we should do it for the students. And of course, that's all going to be nuanced depending on where they're from.
Thank you very much. Anyone else from our group that wants to speak to our discussion?
I'd love to know more about the Morehead State and JCPS work too that was shared. I'd love to hear about that.
Well, I can share the Morehead State. It's an effort that we identify certain high schools that are in our region or outside the region, just near us. Then we assign usually 2 to 3 faculty, staff that will make contact primarily with the counselor. I mean, we make contact with the principal, but it ends up usually with the counselor. And just kind of meet with the schools and talk about what we can do to work together to promote post-secondary kind of transition. We go to those schools, talk to the students. We have some faculty then that will go in and actually teach a class that, if we've identified a career field they want to explore, to do that. But this is done in conjunction, cooperation with the Enrollment Services Office. So there's that partnership, but it's really trying to get out more of this faculty into the schools. So that's kind of what then we track those kids and follow them as they come to the the university.
That's what I was gonna ask. Do you track how many you reach out to see?
Yes,
Yeah.
how many actually enroll?
Matriculate.
Matriculate, yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome.
I do think that that faculty piece is, it's oddly novel. Like that is, I think there's research that suggests that, because as higher ed professionals, a lot of us, I think, tend to think that advisors program or supplemental advisors might be that key stakeholder that helps inform a student's path. And that's true, that we're certainly among that network. But there's also a lot of research that supports this notion that a meaningful connection to a faculty member early on is potentially what sets the stage for a reasonable time to graduation and ultimately higher retention rates. So the idea of having faculty, maybe it's 100 to 200 level courses, reach out to students pre-matriculation, that's a very interesting, if not novel idea to examine a bit more.
Robert, did you mention something? Did you say Nessie or data for engagement data?
Yeah, Nessie is being
That-
one that, yeah.
So there's, I sent Robin a link. There's a community college version of that. It's the SESI. So if we're going to look at one set of data, we probably need to look at both sets of data for that. Just thought that's what that comment is in the chat for.
And so Sandra, I was just wondering, like, when you sent me that link, I clicked on it, but I don't have access to it. Is that something you have to be at an institution to be able to see? And how can we make that available to all of our group members? Or can we?
I don't think it's locked down for just the general page. Now I can't even get to the data. That only goes, it's only released to whomever it's released to at each institution.
Gotcha.
I'll see if I can just send it. Maybe it's some weird transfer of how sometimes our links become safe links. And so I'll just see if I can just send it to you in an email.
And I know that there are, in the realm of the whole K-12 question, that there are some districts have surveys that ask students about their intentions about college going and about, you know, their sense of readiness for that or their comfort level with that. Not all of them have the same ones. I'm somewhat familiar with the comprehensive school survey that JCPS administers. It has a couple questions about that type of thing that we might want to access as well. And I don't know if any of you are aware of any other districts who administer that type of survey to students that might give us more information about what they're feeling anxious about.
I'm just going to throw out one quick thing because it bothers me. I think there's a lot of mixed messaging going on in the state of Kentucky, especially in the rural communities. And Tony, I was Gear Up. That's what I was started under Gear Up 20 years ago here at ECTC. So I'm all for you. But there's a lot of messaging that makes it sound like you don't have to go to college anymore. Just go to trade school. However, most of our colleges, at least at the community college level, have those trades. So to me, we have the best of both worlds in the state of Kentucky. You go get your trade at the community technical college, you get work ready, it's free. Like, to me, it's the best of both worlds. And you're getting some of the general education courses in there as well. But I think there's a lot of mixed messaging with the whole trades and you don't have to go to college, just we need you in the workforce. But I don't really think that's what we're meaning to say, like forget about college altogether. And so I do think that's a conflict of interest for the high schools, especially in the more rural communities, where you can, heck, the students that graduate with one of our 2-year degrees make more after 2 years than I make after 20 years in the industry. So with 2 master's degrees. So, you know, it is it's hard. It's hard to combat that. And I think the Work Ready Scholarship is awesome. I wish it wasn't called a scholarship because that's a barrier. It sounds
Yeah.
like only smart people can get it when it's not, because that's what people think scholarships are, is for smart people. In the K-12 system, and it's something you have to apply for and you might not get it. Well, it is something you have to apply for and you might not get it. But if you're, I mean, I just think there's a thing that I feel like students aren't sure what they're supposed to do.
There's definitely some challenges around the verbiage with the Kentucky Work Ready Scholarship and how it's implemented, and what programs actually qualify and when you can actually start receiving money for those. But anyway, that's a different discussion. I'm interested. I'm very intrigued that you said what you said about the mixed messaging. Gear Up's message, at least for as long as I've been with them, 8 years now, has been all post-secondary and trying to break that mixed message into a message of trade school is post-secondary. And of course, Dr. Thompson's Higher Ed Matters campaign is all about the same thing, a credential, a certificate, whatever it may be. So I think every person who can say that and continue to build that up may combat some of that, but I think a direct campaign to target those messages would be a great idea.
Well, this is great. Are there other points that maybe we weren't able to surface in the 2 breakout rooms that would benefit the group? Just want everyone to have an opportunity to speak out and maybe share some information or ask questions should you have it. Okay, so what we can do, and I think this is a good place to do this, because we'll be asking as many, if not more, questions, I think, as we'll be bringing up ideas. We'll have plenty of time to still think through what are some of those ideas that we might have going forward. But for sure, now that we've been in each of these groups, we've identified 2 focus areas, which really 2 areas that we've picked actually have pretty significant overlap with all the others, really. Like each sort of just the social capital engagement, very well, it bleeds into everyone. And the academic preparation certainly has, it bleeds into a lot. So I do think that's something good that we can think about. But now that we've shared this information, we've begun to ask some of the questions like, so what else do we need to know? We're going to have some more information shared with us. Like, for example, we're going to follow up with ESG, and we're going to try to get some more data, try to get some more exemplars that are pulled so that we can all share back out and let us reflect on those things. But what is it that, what else do we need to know? What's going to help best inform some of our brainstorming and recommendations going forward? And we've hit on survey data. We've already collected some stakeholder data through interviews. What else would really help us to have a better understanding of some of the ideas that we can, or to help us inform ideas going forward?
Robert, I've got a question. One of the things I've been noticing. Do you know? And I know Barrett is on here, and I don't know if we even have this kind of level, this kind of granularity in the data. I think within the state of Kentucky, I talked to a student last week. He's been with KCTCS. Then he went to a different institution. Then he came to us. Then he left and went somewhere else. And so this internal kind of movement, especially with the sense of belonging, it seems people are moving. They're looking for that place where they belong. And even within the state, it doesn't seem It seems they're pretty mobile and moving around and finding that. Do we have any data that addresses that internal movement where they are within higher ed, but they seem to not be sticking? And I think that's delaying completion. But they move in. I mean, you know, even with an I see OJ, yeah, too. With even with an IQ, these students are jumping from institution to institution. Then they leave, they go to a state school, then they go to KCTCS, and then they come back. And so, is there any granularity like that in the data that we might be able to look at?
That's a good question. I don't personally know the answer to that, but I suspect that we will be able to access some of these, like the transfers within systems and within institutions. But Barrett, I saw you come off mute. You can speak to that if you like.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Robert. Yeah, we could definitely take a look at that. So we get every enrollment that each student has at each institution and for each semester. So basically, when each of these individual institutions report back to the Council on Post-Secondary Education, we get all of those enrollment records that CPE collects. So it's going to include everything from the 2- and 4-year publics to the IQ institutions as well. So if you just wanted to look at, you know, at individual students that maybe were at Georgetown one semester, and the next semester they're at UK, and then the following, yeah, those are kinds of things that we can look at.
Dual credit makes that a little bit tricky because sometimes students might have 3 institutions with dual credit. They haven't really been anywhere. They're still at their high school. So
yeah,
it does make it a little bit
that's a great point. Yeah,
that's what I was thinking about, Sandra, too. And I mean, I don't know, you know, from my side, it's more anecdotal than anything else. But I mean, if we're seeing it so regularly, and you brought up a great point with dual credit, right? And so let's just keep on keeping on.
Hey, OJ, to your question, we are now, we're just looking at what's some additional information that we think would be helpful for us to analyze that would help inform some of our recommendations. And some of the transfer movement, that's one of the topics that we've brought up initially.
Did we discuss it all? And again, forgive me for having to take that call. Did we discuss at all the linkages between high school counselors in particular and their relationship with institutions? You can also hear the sweet sounds of my 5-month-old at home, and that's where I'm working today. But did we do that at all to figure out if there's an institutional connection between high schools through counselors or some other person in universities as it relates to the social capital piece of what we were discussing?
We mentioned that on sort of a higher level, but actually digging into looking at those linkages and connections, I don't think that we didn't make that comment just yet. So thank you for sharing that.
To quickly to say, I guess, why that's important. Again, for the population that I think could most benefit in terms of the risk of stopping out because of issues of social capital and or belonging, likely be first generation students, low income students who would just simply need to figure out what all resources are available to them. If institutions, and again, I'm sure a lot of them already have some data around this or some infrastructure around this, but if they have a good relationship with high school counselors, it's likely, it's my assumption, just based on general research on this topic, that those individuals would have a better understanding of how to best connect with those students individually. At our member institutions, at IQ schools, that'll likely be an easier retrofit because there just will be less students in most instances. But again, I think at the public, that could be useful as well, if not for individual touches, for broader data pieces, as in if they know students that have these particular dynamics in their lives might benefit from some additional resource, then they're able to better do it. Again, I assume that this is likely already happening in some fashion at each institution, but for our recommendations, if there's a clear, bright line bridge that connects high schools through, again, a particular position or likely a position at a high school level with an office or department at the collegiate level, then there's that line of accountability, which is also helpful because I was saying that this is a systems group. So the system would be making sure that those linkages are strong from an infrastructure standpoint, so it can persist long after the individual counselor is gone, or the student success coordinator is gone, or whomever it might be. All right, I wasn't on for 20 minutes, so I had to make up for that and talk for 20 minutes, but I'll shut up now. Thank y'all.
OJ, I would like to hear a little bit more about what you're saying there. I like the idea, and I'm wondering if you think it has more impact on the social capital and belonging, or if something like that has more impact on the academic preparation that we're talking about, or both. I would just like to hear you say a little bit more about that.
Yeah, and that was one of my opening comments was I think there is a lot of overlap here, which is good. It means that the outcomes will likely reach a lot of the concerns that we have, if it is developing partnerships, if it's mental health, if it is academic preparation. I think it is both, because if you're a high school counselor, and I said this in my small group, this is where I did my dissertation research, so I've got a particular interest and passion. If you're a high school counselor and you're working with students on how to help them figure out where to go after high school, you probably have an understanding of how well they did academically, where those gaps might be, what might make sense for them, but also where they could have challenges going into a college or a university or a trade school or what have you. So let's take, for instance, a student who says, well, I really want to go into the medical field, help me get there, Counselor A. And Counselor A looks at their high school science courses and sees that they have maybe a couple B's, maybe a C, maybe an A that came out of their freshman year. So right there, they know immediately you're going to struggle at whatever college or university that you go to if you take big time science courses. Biology 240, which if you major in biology, it's probably going to be a first year class. That's going to be challenging for you. So how do we get you on the right path, student, because you want to go into a medical field? Maybe medical doctor is not where you might start now, or at least majoring in biology. Maybe do something else. Let's look at the full parameter of options. Not to say that you can't be a doctor. Here are the obstacles that are going to come in front of you based on your science scores. So we can help you improve academically right now with your high school counselors. Let's figure out or with your high school teachers, let's figure out what that looks like. Now, from the institution side, the institution says maybe it is a Moorhead, University of Pikeville, a Western, UK. I think I've got all the institutions that are represented here. Maybe one of them says, hey, look, we believe in this student. We have the resources here to help figure out whatever their gaps are. That institution, if they have a direct line into County High School A and they work with Counselor A, that counselor says, well, look at these 4 institutions. They've got this program for you. They've got this summer bridge program for you. Oh, you're a sophomore? They've got this program where they help high school students figure out what they want to do in the science field or in the medical field. So all of a sudden, 2 things have happened on a dual track. You've got a high school student who is developing themselves academically, whatever grade they're in. But then you also have them developing this idea of belonging on a college campus because they've been there, in theory, if they go to one of these summer programs, or they've at least got that touch point with somebody who works there. And then you've got the social capital piece because, as we were saying before in our little subgroup, they now are aware of all the options that are in front of them. They have access to those options because they've now worked with their counselor, with each of the institutions that counselor and that school have a connection to. And now they've got the opportunity to figure out what pathway they want to take. So if they want to go to a community college to start out and get an associate's in something, they can do that. Or if they want to go to one of those 4 institutions that we mentioned before, they now have a direct and clear pathway to get there. But at the same time, they've built themselves up academically. So you can see it certainly could benefit both. You can already begin to feel the stress deflating because alongside that, you figured out some financial options and how to make each one of these available to you. So that's a big piece of the mental health issue. So that kind of reduces itself as well. So it's it's a lot easier said than done. But Ron, that's kind of my extended thoughts on that, is that it's a bright line bridge that goes back and forth where the counselor and the school know these institutions do these specific things for students with this direct interest. And it is designed in a way that can help all students. But if you are first generation or low income and you need additional resources just because it's all new to you, then that's where you can have the greatest impact, I think.
So this is what Gear Up is doing.
Right.
But not to the extent of what you're saying where we need to get, because that's what we run into is, okay, what are the resources, having that information shared with us in a timely manner and going to each student. It's just been hard to create a systemic approach to where we can identify all of these resources for a targeted subpopulation and get them in a room and say, here you go. And so that, of course, is one of the problems that the counselors have too, is attacking it student by student instead of being able to get 50 of them together at one time.
I wonder, this is a random thought based on both of your comments, so take it for what it's worth. I wonder if there's a way to get almost a dashboard or a hub or something that high school almost like we're recruiting for academics and fit, not necessarily athletics, although that could be part of the fit. But for all those students like OJ was talking about that aren't necessarily recruited for the athletics piece or band or music or whatever, but they have like 3 or 4 schools they're interested in, or these are the things that are important to them on a hierarchy of things. And then we plug all those things in as a high school counselor, and here's 4 schools that would fit those needs, or you can select specific schools and then have them reach out to that student or something. Just an idea that popped in my head. I'll leave it there.
I think that would be a great resource. And you weren't saying this, so I'm not suggesting that you were. The concern might be if you have a less engaged counselor who then uses it as a way to track people and say, well, you can't do X, Y, and Z based on what this tool says. Again, you weren't suggesting that, but what we could do to mitigate against that is just simply by adding that caveat in to say, these are different schools that you could, based on what you say, student, that you're interested in. Here are the institutions that might make sense based on the fit that you've outlined. But if you want to go to school A or your school A, this is how we could help you get there. It's going to be a little bit more of a challenge, but let's go for it. This could be your challenge when you get there, but let's go for it. And at least that way you've got all the options presented. And I think the tool that you mentioned could be incredibly useful, particularly for counselors who, as we've said, and it's true, they are strapped in terms of their capacity on time and resources. I think that's a great idea.
And I may be wrong, but I think the Kentucky Advising Academy, through it's one of the council's on post-secondary ed's initiatives, is trying to begin something like this. I can't remember what it's called. I know Brett Foster was working on a website to create kind of a one-stop shop for all of these types of things as well, but I can't remember what that's called either. Sorry.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right, Tony. The KAA is working on work like this, and CPE just has vision for a lot of supports that would make these transitions easier. But I'm really glad, Sandra, that you used the term dashboard, because I think it's exactly the kind of work that this group can recommend. We can't have a lot of leverage on what individual institutions choose to do or not to do, but that's the kind of support that maybe we could think about.
Actually, speaking of, Robin, would you be able to go back and we could talk through some of those state levers just to show.
So, Robert, I think we discussed that you all can ignore where it says breakout, because I think we discussed we're probably not going to go back into breakouts. But this is what you see, I hope you see on your screen, is a list of levers that Lauren from ESG, like examples of the kinds of things that a state organization or a state group such as ours would be able to think about. So, Robert, can you see that? Okay, is that?
Yes, I can.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, that's really good framing. This helps give us an idea of what it is that, which we can propose all sorts of things. But I do think if we look at it in terms of framing it around these issues, that that will make our recommendations that much more effective, I think. And possibly a little bit more palatable as far as implementation goes. But definitely things like a dashboard, it fits right in there because those are things that you're essentially just, you're adding to the information and it's increasing access for folks to have access to that information. We can think about, and I don't need to read through each of those for everyone. And I will just say too, because we've actually surfaced and we've been thinking about a lot of questions that it would be helpful for us to think through. We don't meet in September, and I'm not trying to jump ahead here, but we don't meet in September, but we will be giving a summary of our discussion today, as well as some additional information for us to be thinking about so that when we do come back together in October, we can probably hit the ground running a little bit quicker. But thinking about some of our ideas going forward through the lenses of policy and accountability, funding and incentives, communication, data and research, convening and professional learning, is sort of looking at thinking about it in terms of those parameters. I think is going to be very helpful for us when we put forth our recommendations. And actually, we've brought up a couple ideas now. The whole intent of today was, if we do start thinking about some ideas about future work, to sort of keep it at high level. We don't have to get into the weeds yet, and we've done that. But I also would like to give space for, do we need to revisit anything at this time? Do we want to think through more information that we might need? And do we have other ideas similar to or different than the dashboard idea that we want to go ahead and throw out there now? And then maybe we can be thinking about it and refining it before we reconvene. And I will also concede that since this is opening a term for some folks, or a relatively open a term for some folks, I also know there is a whole lot going on right now, and that our mental capacity is sometimes it's finite at these super busy times. And sometimes we need to just exhale for a minute and then come back around. So, all right. Any other, so we've talked through, we've actually, I can't believe it's already 2:20. We've talked through a lot. And I feel like we could keep talking about a lot of this information. But I do just want to give us an opportunity to come back and get anything out there right now before we just start to transition over to more of a wrap-up period. And I will just give a reminder too that we're going to request of our partners ESG to pull some information, help us think through some exemplars, maybe look through some more research articles that can help us think through some of this information, so that it'll help us as we think through September and when we come back together again in October. Any other maybe additional thoughts or concluding comments that we want to share today?
Robert, this is just a thought, and I don't know if this is part of our parameter or not, but looking at counselor training, I know there was some work done several years ago on training for counselors for college access, career access, certain skills standards that should be met, so that counselors going into the middle and high schools, well, actually all counselors, would have some knowledge, background, training in creating a college culture and to do that type of thing. So I don't know if that's something beyond us, but there was a lot of work done several years ago on that, kind of creating those standards. And I don't know whatever happened to that, but it was out there.
Dan, I'm so glad you brought that up, because, you know, our Kentucky Advising Academy has been reaching out and having lots of conversations with P12 counselors. And that is definitely a need that they have identified. So like they know a lot about, you know, emotional and social supports for students while they're in school, and even in the area of testing and that sort of thing, which is takes a lot of their time. But many of them have expressed a desire to know more about college and career counseling, especially ones who have been in it for a long time, who may not have had that as part of their program. And I suspect the same would be true of advisors or counselors at the IG level, although we haven't talked to as many of those as we have, you know, for those who are in high school. So I really appreciate you raising that idea. And I'd love to hear what anybody else has to offer, just in terms of what the counselors or advisors at the higher ed level, you know, if you feel like that would be also a need for them.
I might ask a question because I'm uncertain if this even exists. Is there a professional network in this state of, say, academic career advisors and guidance counselors? Like, is there one network where folks come together and just share best practices, or maybe it's a network that's used for professional development? And I'm not necessarily offering that up. I'm just curious, does a network such as that exist right now?
There is one for high school counselors, but I'm not sure about counselors at the IHE. I see OJ put a comment in the chat.
Yeah, there is the one at the high school level. Again, years ago, they tried to incorporate the institutions of higher ed, but that never really worked. I mean, there's you know, the National Academic Advising and NACADA and those things that tend to do that, but the registrars sometimes gotten together, the college admissions registrar group, but they're all kind of siloed, to be honest. So I think that's what I found. They're each kind of working their own silos, and there's not a lot of crossover. I mean, the institutions, you've got career services on one side and then the academic advising, and it's hard to get the two of them sometimes just don't get along. The careers that might get along, but they don't work together. The career services is more focused on job placement, those things, but not really the advising and doing a lot of the career things. So that's my experience.
Which is something that we definitely need to work to change.
Okay. All right, and Robin, you'll have to remind me if you don't mind, as we're starting to wind down here just a little bit. Are there other links or anything important from the presentation? I can't remember if what was on the remainder of the presentation, and maybe we've come to the conclusion of it.
We're getting really close, Robert. We do have the next steps, and I'll put that up in just a second so everybody can see the next meeting date. But we did want to wait to see what your priorities were, and so where we've identified academic preparation and social capital and sense of belonging as the top two considerations. But as OJ so eloquently said, you know, so much of this overlaps, and we're going to you know, reach a lot of these goals just by the work that we do in one or two of these areas. But our partners, ESG, will be putting together some really great resources around these two key topics. And so we'll be sharing those with you all. We didn't come today with all those resources because we came with 6 or 7 topics to narrow down. So as soon as we have kind of a toolkit or a set of resources that would be helpful, research-based practices, then we'll share those. So Robert, I'll go ahead and share the rest of the slides so that if you want to just talk.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I do think that a big theme, just thinking through, and OJ, I am borrowing another one of your comments. I do think that just that whole notion of how some of our work is siloed. That is like, that's one of the big umbrella concerns that we probably bring to each of these meetings. And I think that it's one that needs, it bears repeating, because that tends to be an issue that I think we're always trying to figure out how to integrate services and folks and bring people together. And those silos, they persist, but we're going to keep trying to figure stuff out. Yeah. All right. So I think as Robin shared, we're going to get more information. We will have some homework coming our way, which we're going to share out. We're going to be able to review some materials. We'll also be able to sum up this meeting a little bit so that we can get a review from it. But yeah, it's been a great discussion. This group always has just super good ideas and rich discussion, and I feel like we could just continue to talk quite a bit. And what we meet again in October, late October, the 20th. And yeah. And I guess we will go ahead and transition on to a wrap up. I don't recall. I apologize, folks. I typically would look at I typically have the outline of the slides in front of me, but for the life of me, I could not get it to print today. We were printing syllabi, and it caused our printer to just totally stop. So I appreciate your grace as I've sort of bumbled through a few of these things today. But we will meet again, and we will send you all more information. And Robin, are there any additional things that I need to share or we need to talk about before dismissal?
I don't think so. The only last comment that I would make is to just let you all know that the CEC that will have its quarterly meeting in September. And so we will be taking back to the CEC these 2 top priorities that you all have raised today. And just to let them know that is what this group has come up with based on the stakeholder feedback and the data that we've been analyzing over the last couple of months. And so in October, we should be able to bring back some comments and suggestions or ideas from the CEC about our intentions and how we want to move forward. So I would just challenge you all to be thinking about these 2 top priority areas and those list of state levers that we identified. Certainly not exhaustive list, but the list from Lauren that is in the chat if you all want to take a look at that. We'll share that with the follow-up email. And just to be thinking about what could we do in these 2 areas as a state to really leverage some change. And I just appreciate so much the comments that you all shared about your individual organizations and institutions today, because I think there's so much excellence. You know, Sandra and Marco were sharing in our small breakout, you know, that other institutions could learn from, and appreciate the dedication to even do evaluations of what you're doing to see if it's working, how is it impacting retention, and also how is it impacting grade point average or students' academic success in those different areas. So we definitely have the right people on the bus here. So I appreciate you all sharing all of your ideas today. And just be thinking about those state levers, and we'll come back to those in October. And be watching for that follow-up email, because we'll definitely have some best practices and research from ESG to share around these 2 big topics that you've identified, which might give us some great ideas about how to move forward. So thank you all for a great meeting today and great ideas.